Doctrine and Devotion is sponsored by Logos Bible Software. Listeners to Doctrine and Devotion can get 10% to 25% off of Logos 8. For more information, visit logos.com/doctrine. Welcome to Doctrine and Devotion, a podcast exploring Christian faith and practice from a Reformed Baptist perspective. My name is Joe Thorne. I'm the lead pastor of Redeemer Fellowship in St. Charles, Illinois.
And I'm Jimmy Fowler, executive pastor at Redeemer Fellowship.
Hey.
Hey.
What's going on, boo-boo?
Nothing. What's going on with you?
Chilling. Got a lot to do today. My sermon's mostly done, but not totally.
When you say mostly done, do you mean like any done?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you got all the study done.
Yeah, the study is done.
You got your notes done.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have it on one sheet.
It's not on one sheet, no. And the sermon summaries, so about an hour's worth of work, I'll be done.
All right, nice.
That's pretty good. So, listen, are you doing the Christmas thing? Are you like singing the songs you play?
No.
You got
No.
WLIT. You listen to the. Why not?
I just don't do it.
Well,
I'm
why
not
not?
big on. Yeah, just not yet. I'll wait a couple more weeks and then I will.
Okay, whatever.
I'm not against others that do. I just don't have the desire to do it now.
Okay, you're doing
I'm not
wrong.
judging you.
I'm judging you're doing it wrong.
Why are you judging me?
Because you only get so much time to enjoy the Christmas season, and you're not enjoying it right now.
I'm going to enjoy it come December 1st.
You're not enjoying it now. Doesn't matter. It's
Exactly.
all right.
I don't have to enjoy it. Why are you looking down upon me for not enjoying it now?
Because you're doing it wrong. That's just my thing. I just think you should, after Thanksgiving, you should be.
I like how your thing is an expectation for everybody else.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly right. Hey, listen, we're starting a new thing today.
What are we doing?
Holy Conference.
Oh, I thought it was going to be, judging Jimmy for not doing Christmas right now.
That's every day. But today, we're going to do a special thing. We're going to start doing this. We're going to do Holy Conference, which is a conversation that we're going to have with different people, our friends, basically, people that we know, people that we love, people that we respect. And today, one of our favorite people. We're doing Holy Conference with who?
Oh, Paul the man Maxwell.
Paul, what's up, man?
Just chilling, man. Thanks for having me on.
Now, listen, what everybody wants to know right now is, are you wearing your shirt?
I was going to ask the same question.
You know what? I was, but now I'm going to take it off. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not really. I'll save that for in person when we do our
Yes,
episode.
because you are going to have to record without your shirt on.
Yeah, that's right.
So for those of you that don't know Paul, if you're a listener of Doctrine and Devotion, you know Paul Maxwell, you know all about SelfWire. But Paul has launched what I'm going to go ahead and call the SelfWire phenomenon. Right?
Are you going to call that? Because that's what he calls it.
No, but he calls his podcast that, but I think it's bigger than the podcast. I think he's started a movement. I'm going to call it the Self-Wire movement.
Okay, you can do that because that's original.
Yeah.
Self-Wire phenomenon is not
I realized that after I said it.
it.
I know I stepped on this podcast title.
He started what I'm going to call
the
Self-Wire phenomenon.
He stole my thunder. That's what it was. Now, listen, Paul, why don't you go ahead and explain to people what SelfWire is, why it's called SelfWire, and the formats that you put your material out in.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, basically, it's a Christian intellectual engagement with modern cultural issues. That's everything from theology to politics to biblical studies to sort of personal issues, mental health issues, everything that I think that the evangelical culture sort of incentivizes us not to think too deeply about. I try to think very deeply about those things, or at least as well as I can. And it's called SelfWire because I went through a long season of my life when I was so focused on theology and kind of bought or drank the Kool-Aid of evangelical big God culture so much that I really went through several years of self-neglect. And I didn't really think much about self-improvement at all. And that all the consequences of that lifestyle that produced really caught up with me. And so SelfWire is just kind of it's not that profound, but it's just kind of a way of thinking, okay, how can we kind of think about, optimizing ourselves and optimizing our lives? Obviously not in a self-obsessed way or in a narcissistic way, but how can we have a self-focus about the way we think and the way we live in a way that optimizes our life, optimizes our mental health, optimizes our relationship with God. And that's what I basically am trying to do. And I release these podcasts I release them as videos on YouTube. I release the audio from that in a podcast feed that you can subscribe to on iTunes. And I'm trying to think, and also the article on the website, which is selfwire.org. So all of those things there.
No, Paul, is this like I'm going to ask you kind of a directed question, so I hope it's
fine.
I'm not too pointed.
Leading the witness.
No,
Leading the witness.
no, but is this like in kind of response? Like I've listened to your episodes, and the one that really sticks out to me is episode 1, where you're talking about Piper and desiring God and things like that. Is this kind of like born out of that? Because you're kind of working out your frustrations and your disagreements with Piper. Is that kind of where this is all starting from, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yeah, there were a few years where I was really writing quite a lot for the Gospel Coalition and Desiring God, and I had a really close relationship with those guys at Desiring God. And since then, I've just sort of found that there was, and I won't speak about them or on their behalf in any way. Those are great guys, all those guys out there at Desiring God, really good guys. But we just had an increasing, the more I evolved in my conception of how I wanted to live my life in light of some of the theological struggles I was going through, and we might get into that a little bit here, there was an increasing strain, and every article I submitted, I sensed a little bit more hesitation on their part, like, where's Paul going with this? And I felt so, and we tried to work together, but it came to the point where I felt so curtailed and so tampered in my own theology and my own writing that I felt like I wasn't allowed to think that way anymore. And they were actually approaching me about teaching at Bethlehem, becoming a professor, a systematic theology professor there. And I just thought, is this the life I want? You know? And it just got to the point where I was at an interview, and, you know, you asked a very frank question, Jimmy, so I'm just sort of giving a frank answer. I was in an interview, I was in an interview for this systematic theology professor position at Bethlehem at an Evangelical Theological Society conference. And I remember sitting there with all the faculty and with John Piper, and everybody was there. And they asked me straight up, they just said, do you struggle at all with looking at pornography? And the answer was, at the time, was yes. Mm-hmm. And I said no. And I left that meeting and I thought, I don't want this to be my life. I don't want to have to say no in order to protect my paycheck, in order to protect the life and so really I just wanted to live an honest life. I wanted to live an honest Christian life, and I realized that the path I was going down wasn't going to allow me to do that, or at least, maybe at the very least it just sort of indicated that at that time I wasn't qualified to do that kind of ministry morally. I don't know, but all I knew was that I didn't want to go down that road, and then I saw these other movements that they weren't glorifying sin, but they were elastic enough culturally to handle guys messing up and to still propel them toward an ideal. And I thought, that looks so much better. And I think that you guys do this so well culturally. And what I know of you and in the way that I've related to you is that you hold yourself to a very high standard, and you help men around you to hold themselves to very high standards. And yet at the same time, you are relationally elastic enough and emotionally patient enough to handle when guys mess up. And I think evangelical culture needs to learn how to draw outside the lines of what it has become accustomed to a little bit, so that it can handle the normal functions and the normal diversity of male psychology. Right now, I think it is so Johnny One Note. I think it is so homogenized as a culture that there is a certain person who succeeds very well, who functions very well within evangelicalism. And that kind of person simply isn't me. And I struggled with that because I thought, does that mean I don't belong? And for a long time I thought it did. And I developed this kind of arrogant, sinful pride about it and became very rebellious about it. And it was due to a couple guys, sort of stalwart evangelical figures like you guys and a couple other people within evangelicalism who I really had grown resentful toward. And they reached out to me. And they invested in me even more when I was really wrestling through this stuff. And I realized, okay, there's hope for me in this context, but it's not in alignment with sort of the center, some of the personalities which really are the gravitational center of this movement. And so now SelfWire is just kind of my attempt to publicly work out some of those ideas. And for a while I thought, maybe I'm not a Christian. Maybe I should leave Christianity. And I came to the point where I realized, well, that's not true. That's not where I am. I am a Christian, and I'm at the point now where, well, I just have to own this for myself. And I'm a PhD in systematic theology, so I have the resources to put a lot of this stuff together as an Orthodox Christian. But what does that look like culturally? And I think that's something you guys are leading the way in so well. Yes, why I'm not a Christian hedonist, because obviously it's wonderful to delight in God, but it's not the only lens that we use to understand the Christian life. It's one tool, and I think that's a lot of evangelical culture is really just kind of picking up the scraps from the stock and trade of secular wisdom and putting a Christian label on it and saying, and it's like, we can do better than that. We can do much better than that. And Christians actually have the internal resources and really do have the cultural resources and the legacy of the past millennia of Christian orthodoxy to build a much better and much more elastic and much more meaningful culture than the one that we currently have. And I realized I don't want to leave. I want to be a part of building something better. And the fact that you guys do what you do is one of the few things that I look to and say, okay, that gives me hope, because they're doing something that's theologically meaningful. It's biblically informed. It's ecclesiastically rooted in the local church. And yet at the same time, they are not so stringent and Johnny one note that only one personality type excels here. And so that's inspiring to me. So I rambled a little bit there, but I appreciate you indulging it.
No, I love hearing all about us. Continue.
Yeah, we just took our shirts off because we were feeling so built up and strong.
I see it all the time.
So, we do Doctrine and Devotion the way that we do it because this is what we would listen to. Like, this is what we would like. This is the kind of thing that we benefit from, interpersonally in real life. And one of the things that you said recently that I really liked was, people were asking you, why are you so hard? Like, why are you coming out swinging? Whether you're talking about feminism or white fragility, you don't come out nuanced in how you talk about the error, or even maybe just the perceived error. You're very direct. You're confrontational. I don't think you're mean. I don't think you're overly harsh. I don't think you're being even inappropriately negative. But you definitely come out very direct and you go, this is wrong. This is why it's wrong. And of course, you support your argument very, very well. Mm-hmm. And I remember you said, listen, I'm not trying to have a conversation with leftists. I'm not trying to have a conversation with people that disagree with me. I'm talking to myself when I was 20 years old, something like that.
Yep.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. Man, I get in trouble all the time because of my personality. I would actually like to hear if this is true for you guys, because I imagine it has to be. It has to be true for you guys at some level. Where I remember, especially during my PhD, I mean, it's always been true for me because I've always been very aggressive and I've always had a lot of energy. Chalk it up to daddy issues. You could chalk it up to probably a bunch of stuff, right? But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I've always had a lot of energy and I've always been very on the edge, very aggressive, just had an intensity about me. And it's very off-putting to a lot of people. And hey, that's a personal thing. I should probably work on that, right? That's something, it's like, hey, you're coming off a little intense. Maybe learn how to just, calm down a little bit for a little while. It's like, yeah, that's probably good tactical advice for me, right? Just in life. But there was a point where I was actually getting rebuked by it. And there was even a point where my doctoral advisor called me on the phone and was saying, a few people have told me that you're really just off-putting in your personality. And he called it a sin. And he was like, you really need to repent from this. And I thought, okay, this is it's a signal flare for me. And it was one of those moments where I thought, it was one of those darker moments where I thought, well, I really don't belong here. And then the more I started talking about it, the more I really started recently, only in the past 6 months to a year or so, really started owning this to say, you know what? The reason that there's not a place for somebody like this within evangelicalism is because all of the people who go to the top of these evangelical institutions, and often, not all the people, but many of the people who are just kind of find their way into positions of authority, get there because they are agreeable. They get there because they are yes men, so that evangelical culture can at times, in fact, incentivize you not to be aggressive and not to rock the boat too much. And if you're all about just rocking the boat and rattling the cage for the sake of rattling the cage, I mean, that's just sort of absurd, I think. But when you have a culture that actually incentivizes passivity, you create really a beta culture. You really kind of create this very effeminate, neutering, emasculating culture where all your job is to say yes more and more and more and more. And so I thought to myself, wow, maybe I really don't belong here. And then when I started talking about it, all these guys started coming out. They started saying, well, not coming out, but they started talking to me and they started saying, hey, like, I really resonate with this. I really resonate with this. And a lot of guys who felt that they didn't belong and who actually felt sinful for kind of going to secular sources for a lot of wisdom. They felt like maybe their personality was too intense. They thought, you know what, maybe there is a place for me here. And I realized, you know what? We can make a place within evangelicalism for a broader conception of what personalities are allowed within evangelicalism. Yeah. And I realized, oh yeah, like who I was at 20, between the ages of 20 and 25, when I felt super alone, super isolated. I felt like I felt like everything about me was just offensive to everybody in this culture because I was just high energy, into lifting weights, into sports, all this stuff, right? I just felt like, oh man, I just really don't belong here. I really don't belong here. And I realized, you know what? No. I do belong here. And there are a lot of guys like me who feel the exact same way. So I'm talking to me in that 20 to 25 age range. And I'm realizing there are a lot of guys who are in that 20 to 25 age range that are actually attracted to this kind of talk. And they are not getting, there's nobody there right now to lead them because, and this goes into a deeper conversation, but evangelicalism has a mixed relationship with people who are high power, sort of more alpha-oriented personalities, because a lot of times those guys, they're not able to ascend to positions of authority in common context, but when they do, it's really big and it's really powerful, and it blows up very quickly. And so usually there's not many very strong male personalities that remain and endure in positions of authority, and so that kind of perpetuates this myth that, well, these personalities really just aren't very welcome here at all. And I don't think that has to be the case. I don't think the Bible entails that. I don't think that the history of Christian orthodoxy entails that for us. In fact, I think that most of the meaningful contributors to Christian orthodoxy were very troublesome people in terms of their temperament and their personality. That certainly was the case with Augustine and Peter Abelard. And the more you read about church history, you realize this is a bunch of misfits here. And they were just following their conscience, and they were doing what was right, according to their own conscience before the eyes of God. And those are some of the most profound theological movements that you have in history, are people who, for sure, personality-wise, would not fit within common evangelical culture today. So I think we need to normalize that. Again, not normalizing sin, but diversifying our conception of, okay, who really belongs here? Who belongs here in terms of personality?
Well, I actually have a few questions I want to pick your brain about, but there's really one issue that we wanted to kind of dial in on here in our conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the things was about the dark night of the soul that you're talking about, right? The idea of feeling alone, isolated, not welcomed, and out of place.
Or even like you feel distant from God, where, I mean, a lot of Christians go through this where you sense that God is distant, he's not listening, that the experience of his grace has waned. That's what we'd like. As we know, you went through that period of time. I went through that period of time as well. But we wanted to hear from you, and you don't have to get into details, but we want to hear you talk about how it is that people wind up in that position, and what is the path forward? Like, how do people make it through that dark night?
Yeah. Wow. That's a really good question. I won't get too bogged down in the details of my own story. It's suffice it to say, there was a time when I was, I was moving from Philadelphia to Chicago for my PhD. I was leaving a lot of friends behind in relational strife. My dad had just died. I had just broken up with a serious girlfriend that we'd been together for a long time. And I remember sitting in an Easter service in this church that it's the church I had been at for my entire time I was at during my MDiv, and thinking, I really want to believe. I just felt like I was really white knuckling it. I was praying. I was reading my Bible. I was going to counseling. I was thinking, God, please just carry me through. Help me. And I remember that there was this moment in the Easter service where they started singing like, up from the grave, whatever that song is. It was like this Christian victory song. And there's nothing wrong with that song. There's nothing wrong with Christian having a victorious
the melody. The melody's pretty wrong.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. But it was this moment, and I felt at that moment like my faith just broke. Like I just felt like a bone breaking. I felt like I just don't trust you anymore. Like I just remember looking at God thinking, you're never going to come through. And it's like, well, what were you trusting God for? Were you trusting God for material prosperity? But that was the crisis that I was going through. Well, if you're never going to come through, what good are you? It's like, great, salvation, see you when I'm dead. Otherwise it's like, if you're going to let me go through all this stuff, and those were kind of some of the thoughts that I had, and I realized I just felt forsaken, and it's like, and I felt very much like that feeling was an unbiblical idea. Of course, it's not unbiblical, because if you read the book of Lamentations, it's like we have this one verse that we use in Lamentations about God's mercies being new in Lamentations 3, but people don't realize the book of Lamentations doesn't end in chapter 3. It ends in chapter 5 with them saying, "Will you forsake us forever?" And I realized, like, oh yeah, it's very biblical to feel forsaken by God. Of course, you mentioned this, Joe. David feels this way very often. I think it's a common experience that people have, and most young people often are afforded the luxury of not having yet had that experience. But most older saints have had that experience at some time in their life, because they've lost so much and they've been through so much, and they have a very sober faith, because they've really been tested. And that's what that was for me. And that induced a season of intense drinking that wasn't good. It wasn't good. It put me in a spiral that was bad. And I had to overcome that. And honestly, the way that, I would say the primary way, the primary means of grace that God used to keep me in the faith was, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on the podcast, but it was honestly you guys, believing in me, like still reaching out and say, hey, I remember, Joe, you texted me once, and I was processing something with you. I was going through a hard time, and I was kind of trying to explain why I wasn't coming to church regularly like I wanted to. And you were like, you know what, man, we've claimed you as a brother. And that meant so much to me. It's like, oh, I've been claimed. Like I felt like I wasn't gone. I felt like I was floating off into outer space with just completely detached from life and Christianity and myself. And it was moments like that. And Justin Taylor did a similar thing where he reached out and he said, man, let's just talk. Like, what's going on with you? And then he bought me breakfast. And it was, there's a couple moments like that where people looked at me and said, listen, I know you're having a really hard time, and I want you to know I love you. I consider you belonging, and I want to be with you as you work through this stuff. That was it. That was it.
What's the wrong kind of advice that we're likely to give as Christians to people who are struggling with their faith or struggling with the faith, right? Because those are two different things.
Right.
But what's the bad counsel that we need to avoid giving to people that are going through that?
Right. Well, it's tough because counseling, especially, it's so person to person. But one thing is that, theological misconception could very well be a source of a negative experience of God, right? It absolutely could. But theology is mysterious. And so, for example, one of the things that really pushed me away from Reformed theology for a while was the complexity of its answer to the problem of evil. I felt for a long time like it had a very satisfying answer to the problem of evil. And then I realized, I don't think I'm satisfied with this answer. In fact, I became very horrified by it. And people tried to explain it to me like, well, don't you realize the distinction between God's decretal will and his permissive will? And I'm like, well, yeah, that solves everything. I've never heard of that before, and it's like, for somebody, maybe it would. I don't know. And so I don't want to speak for everybody and say, well, that distinction doesn't do anything, because it's like, obviously it's a very important theological distinction. It may be the very thing that actually helps this theodicy to succeed. But for me, it didn't actually resolve the tension that I felt betrayed by God. And it didn't resolve that tension for me, because in my mind, I still had a direct line back to God. And that's something that even Piper's 7 points of Calvinism certainly entails that even if you make a distinction between decree and permission, well, it's still going back to God. You still tie the suffering back to God, and you're not always able to catalyze it or classify it as a positive experience. And so I would say, if somebody's going through a rough time or really struggling with their faith, there are two ways you can go wrong in theological guidance for that person. One of them is to suggest that, well, they just don't understand the question, or that their suffering is based in a misunderstanding of the theology. They may properly understand the theology, but they may be wrestling with a mystery. And they just, it may be an irresolvable theological mystery. The problem of evil is not an easy problem to solve. That doesn't mean there's not a solution, but maybe they do understand it and they're just disturbed by this issue. It's not, and so that's one way of doing it. And another way of, or another thing is to say, well, let's say that I can only use myself as an example, but let's say that they are disturbed by God's relationship to their suffering and they feel betrayed by God. And it's
like the psalmists sometimes.
Right, exactly. Well, another thing that people might say is, well, don't think about the sovereignty of God right now. Maybe think about the love of God. It's like, well, so in both of those directions, I would just say, I understand the impulse, because what you want to do is you want to manage the pain and you want to say, well, let's keep God out of it, that kind of thing. But Scripture is full of lamentation, and it's full of people sort of calling God to the carpet and saying, where are you? And as far as I'm concerned, reading the book of Job, people often read the book of Job in a way that actually betrays the whole message of the book of Job, because people read the book of Job with his three friends giving him counsel, saying, you must have done something wrong. You must have done something wrong. What is it? What is it? And then God comes on the scene, and everybody interprets that as, because Job of course says at the end that he repents in dust and ashes. But even then, it's really a recognition of his humility, because the book itself says, in all this Job didn't sin. And so what, and yet the whole time he's calling God to the carpet. He's cursing creation. He says, God, why would you even create? He's using this cosmic language. He says, may the stars come down. He's saying, he's cursing the day of his birth. Like, God shouldn't have created me. If this was what was going to happen, God shouldn't have created me. But God shows up and he honors Job's call, and he says, you know what? I am God and you are nothing. And that's a fact, but I am here. I'm really here, and I'm really here to face you person to person. We talked about this a little bit on the last Doc and Devo, but this notion of wrestling with God is very difficult. It's very difficult. And especially one of the reasons I've had to come out of the whole Christian hedonist conception of things is because I couldn't conform myself to that emotional law. I felt it was truly an emotional law to say that you always have to be rejoicing in God. Listen, I'm not anti-rejoicing in God, but to be quite honest, I've regained my faith. I've regained my Christian practices. I'm now, what my wife and I are attending an Lutheran Church Missouri Synod here in Indianapolis. We love the faith and the life and the Christian family that we're building here, but I haven't had a positive experience emotionally of God since that Easter day. I still haven't. And you know what? That's okay. Like, it's not ideal. I would still like to have something like that, but you know what? I'm not gonna obsess over it, because I'm going to assume that there's more to the Christian life than delight in God, and I'm going to pursue those things. I'm going to pursue those meaningful things, and I'm motivated by those things. And maybe one day that will happen again. Maybe one day it's Scripture speaks of the spiritual life as a seasonal thing in terms of harvesting and sowing and planting, and maybe this is just a sowing season, and there will be an emotional harvest down the road. Either way, that's kind of what I'm holding on to right now. People in the dark night of the soul, right? That this people who are in depression and feel distant from God. It's very, very difficult. I'm releasing an episode on SelfWire on, is there hope for the depressed? What do you do to overcome a dark night of the soul? I'll dip a little bit into that content. I know we're kind of running out of time here because I've been rambling so much, but this is an important distinction between dispositional depression and situational depression. Okay. Dispositional depression is something that it's part of you. It's part of your attitude. It's part of your mindset. It's part of the way you look at the world. Situational is something that it's your circumstance, right? Then you distinguish between pathological aspects of depression and active aspects of depression. Pathological is the part over which you don't have any control, right? Maybe it's your serotonin, maybe somebody died, right? Whatever, it's dispositional or situational, right? And then the active is the aspect of your depression over which you do have operational control. And many times we don't want to admit that exists, but it does exist. And what we can do is we can use our wills to reconfigure our situations and to reconfigure our dispositions in order to achieve victory over depression. And it's a very long process and it can be a very difficult process. And very often there are still many bad days. But what really characterizes a dark night of the soul is that every day is like hell. Whereas when people who are recovering from depression, it's like, there are some bad days, but there are some good days. And people who are really going through a really bad bout of depression, they'll say there are no good days. There are no good days.
Right.
And if you can get to the place where, I have a few good days or I have a few bad days, that is ideal. And if you use strategies, I think that the two main strategies for achieving victory over depression are social reintegration and financial stabilization. Those are the two major sources of depression, are financial instability and social isolation. If you can rectify those two things in your life, the chances that you will recover from your depression eventually, or that those are the steps you need to take to one day reap the benefit of having recovered from your depression, the chances of that happening are very high. Very high. And for me, it was social isolation. It was a big part of it. I was also job to job, paycheck to paycheck, which wasn't good either. But it was having people like you and having people like Justin Taylor and John Bloom and other people I resented. The people who I thought, you think you're so better than me, you're not. And I was angry at them. Having people I was angry at reach out to me. That was the most tactile, meaningful, effective, restorative experience of grace I could have possibly experienced in that moment.
Oh, and that's awesome.
That's
listen, I know.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
I know that, like a lot of what this is, at least what part of what this is, the negative aspect of counsel, the incorrect approach is when people dismiss the struggle outright, or they say you shouldn't be having this struggle. They discount the experience. And wait, hang on, Jimmy. Speaking of discount, I was just thinking about Logos Bible Software. They're sponsoring this episode, right?
They are.
Is there a discount?
There is,
but
a discount.
The good kind of discount.
The good kind of discount. Yeah, if you head on over to logos.com/doctrine, you can use the code DocandDevo8, and you could save 10% if you're buying it new, 25% if you are updating. Our good friend, I was actually thinking for the last one I was going to say his name right, but I don't know how to say it.
Shrek. Just call him Shrek. Shrek.
I feel bad because we've been saying
Derek.
Shrek. Okay. So big thanks to Logos for sponsoring for the month of November. They're giving our listeners a great discount. For a lot of people, Bible study is a struggle. They don't know where to start. They don't have the commentaries or the resources to do an in-depth study. But with Logos 8, it's faster, it's cleaner, and you've got the resources there for your devotions or your sermon prep, or to even get ready for Bible study during the week. So head on over to doctrine.com. Logos.com/doctrine. Use the code DocandDevo8 and save some money.
All right, Paul, listen, we want to do these conversations with our friends that are brief and short, and just kind of tease people into thinking about these things. Your experience and your thoughts are always very, very helpful.
I love them.
But we want to do some real quick rapid fire things, and then we're gonna bust out of here. Okay?
Cool. Sorry, I've been rambling so much.
No, it's all good stuff. That's why we want you on here. All right, so rapid fire. This means just like one sentence answers. Ready?
Okay, you ready? You want me to start? I'm gonna do it.
You go ahead.
Here we go. All right, Paul, ready?
Yes.
Self-help books, good or bad?
Good.
What music are you listening to?
August Burns Red and Berzarin Quartet.
And what's that one band you mentioned recently on Twitter? I started listening to them. I can't remember, but it's hip hop, but it's instrumental.
Oh yeah. You know what? I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's
that good.
We'll link to it. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's good. It's instrumental stuff for studying, and heavy metal and Eminem for like working out. Anything to just get the good juices flowing. All
right. Favorite podcast?
Doc and Devo.
Yeah, okay. We knew you would say that. But then, okay, after that, what are some good podcasts people should be listening to besides SelfWire and Doctrine and Devotion?
I'm currently a zealot right now of Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Andrew Klavan, those guys. Anytime Jordan Peterson is on the Joe Rogan Experience, trying to think of some other podcasts that I really like.
So far you've covered politics, sort of philosophy, and pot with Joe Rogan.
Yeah, right. Oh,
No, those are great. I listen to those. Yeah, I listen to those podcasts.
Yeah, the Jocko podcast is, of course, very amazing. Sometimes he gets into some military history stuff that I find very interesting, but probably more interesting for vets. Also, Bill Burr. Love the Bill Burr podcast. In terms of like sort of professional development stuff, I like the Pro Blogger podcast. It's a really good podcast. And I'm trying to think. That's kind of what I'm listening to right now. Yeah. How about you guys? What are some big ones for you?
I don't listen to a lot of
honestly,
podcasts.
I listen to SelfWire.
Of course.
No, for real. I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts. I don't listen to Joe Rogan. I do Ben Shapiro.
Yeah.
I do that one. And Adam Carolla.
I listen to a bunch. I listen to a lot of true crime stuff at night when I'm going to bed.
And Sasquatch Chronicles.
Okay, I listen to Sasquatch Chronicles. I do that. I like that. But no, the ones that I get excited about are generally the ones that I'm like super regular on. I do listen to Ben Shapiro, even when I disagree with him. I just really enjoy him. I also obviously I listen to SelfWire. I don't listen to a lot of explicitly Christian podcasts.
No, right.
I don't find them. I read theology and Christian and life and all kinds of stuff all the time, especially the Puritans. But in terms of podcasts, it's generally secular. Okay, what about this? Best. Let's see. I didn't write this one down. I had rapid fire questions. So, shoot. I was going to ask him about a philosopher. What? Okay, Epictetus.
Oh, yeah.
Should people read Epictetus?
Yes, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. These are all pretty good. Sort of self-help, motivational. They get
from when?
These are from Stoics, ancient Stoics. These are from like 3rd century BC to 2nd century AD. All of these authors, and they're extremely helpful in terms of getting the perspective of, you know what, I don't have control over a lot in life, and I shouldn't tie my emotions to things that I don't have control over. I should tie my will to the things that I do have control over, and I should seek to understand that over which I have operational control, and seek to free my emotions from everything else.
All right, Paul, I got one last question.
Yep.
You got rapid fire. You ready?
Yeah.
I know what you're going to ask. I know what you're going to ask.
Okay, Paul. Your real T-shirt size.
Depends on the store.
Real T-shirt size.
I typically go for medium.
What should you be wearing?
What shipping do I wear?
No, what should you be wearing?
With those giant man pecs.
Probably
Yeah.
XXL. Probably. You know how
And,
it is.
all right, before we go, last one. Who's the podcast wife?
Oh,
Don't be a coward. Don't be a coward.
Don't you dare,
Listen,
Paul.
What would Epictetus tell you to say?
Oh, well,
Paul.
oh my goodness.
Be a man.
You guys are putting
Be a man.
me-
I'm willing to see. I'm not afraid to say it because I'm a man. Jimmy's the podcast.
Joe
wife.
is.
Jimmy's the podcast.
Joe.
See, we can do
Joe.
it, but you're not man enough to say it.
I'm going to say Joe. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say Joe.
You're never coming back on the podcast ever.
I love you, Paul. So, Paul, where
you're
can
the
people
worst.
find you online, man?
whatever.
Because people are
Who
going to
cares?
listen. If you're not
Nobody
listening
cares.
to selfwire.org, you
Don't
need to head
bother.
on over there. The SelfWire phenomenon is fantastic. Not Joe, sorry. Paul, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. It's all Paul C. Maxwell is my handle on all those places. And
Nice middle initial.
That's
so,
right. Yep.
So highfalutin of you.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, what are you going to do? Yeah,
Why don't you just put Dr. Paul C. Maxwell?
I probably should. Yeah.
You know, as the podcast wife now, I feel like, I
that
feel like
felt
you
so
judge
good.
me quite a bit.
That felt so
telling me to be in
good.
shape and stuff.
I'm so
as
happy,
the podcast,
Paul.
I don't know,
You
man.
just made
Whatever.
my day, brother. I can't tell you
you know
how
what? I
happy am.
you know what? I see a dark night of the soul coming back around for you, Paul. That's what
Oh,
I see
don't-
going.
why
I
don't
think
you
it's
get
coming.
that out of
I think
him?
you're right. I think it's coming.
Come back up here so we can hang out, man. We miss you. We love you.
miss you, brother.
I'm going to be up there mid-December to be on Pastor Pat's podcast.
Wait,
to talk
what?
about
Wait, huh?
alcohol.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Why?
What'd you say?
I'm going to be on
What?
Pastor Pat's podcast to talk about alcohol.
Why?
What?
Paul.
When did SelfWire jump the shark? I didn't.
That was good. High five.
That was good.
Seriously, man, we love you. Can't wait to see you. You're gonna have a great time on Pat's podcast and Matt's
No one will
podcast.
hear it, but yeah.
No, Pat will hear it.
Oh, Pat will.
Yeah,
okay.
and Matt.
And I'll probably listen to it because you're on it.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, guys. Oh, hey, love you. Thanks so much for having me on.
For real though. Wait. Mid-December. What's the date? Text me.
Whatever,
Let's set some up.
I'll text you. Whatever the second weekend in December is.
Well, you could follow us online on Instagram and Twitter, or wait, no,
At
Doc and Devo, or on Facebook /Doctrine Devotion. You can head to the website doctrinedevotion.com. There you can contact us. You can sign up for the email blast, or hit up the store jofostore.com and grab some gear. Big thanks to Logos. Head on over to logos.com/doctrine. Use the code DocandDevo8 to save either 10% or 25%. Fresh pod every Monday and Thursday. Blog posts on Wednesdays. Video content when available. Later.
Hate you, Paul.
No, you don't.
Hate
I
you,
love
Paul.
you, Paul. You're the best, Paul.
Hate you, bro.
Ready?
Love you guys.
Love you.
Hate you.
Love you. Bye.
Hate you.
Love you. Bye.
Sure.
Love. Bye. Bye.
Nice pass.
Bye. Bye.
Go. Put
Bye.
your shirt on.
Bye. Small shirt. I got one for you. Bye.